Alright, today we are going to be getting into some serious work on the soundboards of our two Parlor guitars. So, of course, we need to install the brace blanks and then later on carve those brace blanks. But let me talk a little bit about where we're at right here. So I just cut out the sound hole on both of these. On this jig right here, which is simply just a piece of plywood, a nice big board with a 3/16 of an inch pin installed in the center so that I can use my circle cutting jig on my Dremel and not only cut rosette channels but also cut out sound holes, and I can go right through the soundboard material here and right into this backer board, because this board, well, that's what it is. It's a backer board, so it's essentially like scrap. It's meant to be abused. It's important that before I cut out that hole, I mark out my bracing pattern using the template that I made in an earlier video. And that is because before the sound hole is cut out, the same hole that is used to anchor this onto that backer board that I talked about is also used to very easily orient the template for marking out all of this. Okay? Now, I don't actually need to mark out all of this and have the lines drawn out and so clearly as they are right here, but I've done this for demonstration purposes, just like I do in the workshops I teach. I lay all this out as well to be able to visualize what you're doing as you're installing the brace blanks. So we're gonna work on it this way with everything laid out like this, but just keep in mind that when I transfer the marks over from my template, this is all it looks like. I just have these little dots here. It's almost like a connect the dots constellation kind of thing, but I don't actually have to connect those dots if I have a deep understanding of what the bracing pattern is supposed to look like anyway. Then these dots are enough to orient me. So I have behind the camera here a variety of different sized blanks, just oversized rectangles of western red cedar mostly. Some of it is Sitka spruce. Most of this is the cedar though. So the way that I do this is I just always keep a nice bin that I can cut up larger billets into dimensions that I commonly use. So these big pieces are 14 by 6 millimeters. And then I cut some smaller pieces that are still 6 millimeters wide but only 8 millimeters tall. And lastly, transverse bar is 14 by 14. So now I can take these blanks and just line them up with my pattern. Make them a little bit oversized. You want a little bit of extra to work with. You see how this is extending just a little bit, about 1/8 of an inch past the outline. Same thing on this side. So that's where I'm going to cut it. By the way, for the X-brace and for this single tone bar here, on the larger guitar there's 2 tone bars by the way. For the X-brace and the tone bars, I like to kind of sift through my bin of bracing blanks and look for the best, most high quality pieces that I can find. So that would mean the most quarter sawn, meaning the grain is standing straight up as viewed from the end here, and also the tightest grain lines. Basically within this 6 millimeter width, the largest number of grain lines I can get. Okay, so that's optimal. It's not that I wouldn't be okay with something. Here's one like this. This actually isn't bad either, but you can see that they're a little bit wider, those grain lines, than this one. So this one's a little bit better than that one. Alright, and then I think the leftover waste piece here, because again I still really like the grain on this individual piece, This will probably work for my tone bar. Now that will work. Looks like it comes up short, but the truth about this tone bar is that this tone bar, I know that later on, it gets tapered. It doesn't meet the end of the outline like the X-Brace does. It gets tapered down to nothing, feathered as they call it, down to the soundboard far before it reaches the outline. It's not structurally connected in with the sides like the X-Brace and the transverse bar are. That means I've got my two X-Braces, I've got my tone bar, and now I just need to find blanks for everything else. Alright, here's my transverse bar. In fact, I've already got the hole for access to the truss rod adjustment mechanism. That's already drilled in there. So that's nice. That'll work great for that. The transverse bar, by the way, sets the upper limit to the perimeter of our vibrational footprint. So everything below this bar is the vibrational footprint of the top. That's what's intended to be responsive. And everything above the bar you can consider essentially acoustically inert. That's really more about having a good, strong structure for the neck block and the fretboard tongue, which is going to sit on top here. So now lastly, I just need two. Normally there's 4 finger braces, 2 on each side, but for such a small model here, I'm only doing 2 finger braces, and that fills in the space appropriately. 4 would be too much. It would make the area too tight. I just need, neither of these are braces. This is the fretboard graft, so it's not a brace, it's a graft, meaning it's like a piece of the top, you know, a thin, flexible plate that gets glued to the top to add thickness to the top in this area. And then the bridge plate is a plate as well, so it doesn't stand tall like a brace. It is a thin plate of material, in this case maple. We talked about this in a recent episode. This is the bearing surface for the ball ends of the strings, and it helps distribute out the torque from the bridge, which is located directly on the other side of this plate. So let's cut these down the length. I could take this over to the bandsaw to do it, or I could just do what I'm doing right here and just use a little Dazuki saw to cut these out by hand. Okay. There we have it. Looks pretty good. I think we're done. No, I'm just kidding. Let's go ahead and radius the bottom of these braces. So this top is going to have a 30-foot radius. That's going to give it a outward dome to it, which gives the top a lot more structure than if it was just flat. You never want to glue a top dead flat to your rim set, because you're going to run into all kinds of problems when that wood moves, because wood is hygroscopic and it's guaranteed to move. And not to mention, you're going to have to brace it up a lot more than you otherwise would have to if it had just a little bit of doming to it. Because again, doming creates strength, creates structure in and of itself, even without the braces. Great example of that is just an egg. An egg you might think is very fragile, and it is if you actually hit it on the edge of something, like the edge of a tabletop. But if you just take an egg and squeeze it, and you can go ahead and try this if you want, it's actually hard to break an egg that way, because an egg is strong. That shell, that shape of the shell is strong, even though the material of the shell is weak. So we need to radius the mating surface of all these braces before we glue them down. Here we are about to cut the lap joint into our 2 arms of the X-brace here. So the way that these go together is, well, a lap joint, which basically means we're going to have a notch on one piece and a corresponding notch on the other piece so that those two notches can bite into one another, forming a joint. So we'll start out by just laying this in place. And before I do anything at the joint here, just for the sake of being able to very easily find the correct orientation and not confuse myself as I go through this process, I'm going to go ahead and mark the orientation that it's in right now. So what I mean by that is I'm going to write LR right down there for lower right, and LL for lower left. Okay, and that should be enough there, but I can also go up here and write UL upper left, UR upper right. So that way there's no way I can get confused here. So now let's line this up in its footprint. Hold that in place, and then I'm just going to balance this other piece on top of the bottom piece. Line that up. There we go. And I'm doing this just so I can mark exactly where that joint is going to be right there. Alright, so now I'm going to use a square and the marking gauge to completely mark out this box or this notch that I'm going to cut. I'm going to cut out the notch, and then I can press those two together, mark out the next notch, and cut that notch. At that point I'll have two notches, and there'll be a little bit of fine-tuning after that, but that's pretty much it in a nutshell. Alright, so we've got a really nice, super tight joint here, and we're going to go ahead and glue down the X brace first, and then as you'll see, all of the other braces are really a process of fitting those, I like to think of them as like the capillaries coming off of the main artery. Now that we have the X brace in place, I can go ahead and check my fit here by butting the bridge plate up and against the two lower X brace arms, and the edges here of the bridge plate match up pretty well. I'm trying to see if I see any gaps at all, really. It actually looks really good. Remarkably good. If I needed to touch this up at all, though, I would take it over to I have a manual disc sander and just hit that edge to adjust that angle so it fits just right against this X brace. But I don't think I need to do any extra fitting here. Let me take one last look. Yeah, that Looks exceptionally good as it is. Okay, so I'm just going to round over this edge here and this edge of the bridge plate, just for a little bit of aesthetic appeal, even though we'll never see it again once it's in there. Such is the way we do things as luthiers. Alright, now let's do the tone bar and the finger braces over there. So all of those are the braces where I need to marry up the angle that butts up against the X brace. And I like to do that with this cool new tool that I found on Amazon. Actually, a viewer of the show suggested this to me, and can't remember his name. Sorry. And it's a manual disc sander, essentially. And so it's actually for picture framing. See if you can see that. Precision Sander Elite. And this is not a, affiliate product or anything. I don't do that stuff. This is just a good tool. And I wanted to share it with you guys for doing little micro work, like brace work, doing little angles like that. The kind of stuff that where the powered disc sander would be a little bit too heavy-handed, right? This thing comes into handy. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. All right, so first I'm just putting an extreme angle into it like this, and that's simply because I know once this is glued down, later on I'm going to carve a taper going in this direction and also going in this direction. And so in the end, this piece that butts up against the X brace is going to be about that height. And so fitting it against the X brace is going to be that much easier if I'm only fitting this much height rather than fitting the full height, right? So I can get more accuracy this way. Alright, so here's what I'm talking about fitting. It's a little shadowy in here, so hopefully you can see this. But I need to fit the angle that this outline of a brace here meets the X brace. I need to transfer that onto this end right here before we glue it down. And good morning, guys. Here we have it. I've taken this out of the Go Bar deck. This thing is braced. It's ready to be carved. So if this looks a little extra stiff to you right now, that's because it is. And in fact, here, if I tap it, it sounds pretty stiff, which basically means it sounds very bright, trebly. And I can flex the X-brace arms alternatively like this, and it is completely unyielding at this point. In the end, these X-brace arms will have a slight, very slight yield to them. But that is a further process which we will get into another time. Hey, there's that rosette. That's pretty cool, right? So yeah, I'm going to carve out the tapers on this next and eventually voice this top. It'll be fun. All right, guys, that's it for now. See you in the next one. If you learned something here, please give this video a like and subscribe so you can be notified when I release a new DIY guitar making video. And if you want to really learn more, take one of my structured online courses at ericschaferguitars.com or register for a hands-on guitar building workshop here with me in Burnville, Pennsylvania.